Resident Evil Requiem is on the horizon, and in honor of the series' 30th anniversary, I wanted to talk a little bit about my hopes, fears, and doubts for this new game, as well as yap about my thoughts on how the series has evolved into what it is now. The ninth game seems to be attempting a marriage between the two most polar opposite formats of RE game, having the player switch back and forth between two characters, one who is weak and defenseless, building an atmosphere of survival horror, and the other being an unstoppable John Wick badass who cuts through enemies with the exaggerated swagger of a 50-year-old white guy. The new take on old ideas has potential, but I have a lot of thoughts and expectations built off of my experience with the rest of the series, so I'd like to share them here before the game comes out. I want to preserve all of my thoughts and worries now, so that when the game does come out, I'll be able to look back and see how right or wrong I was to be worried, and if I feel like I have something interesting to say about the game after playing it, maybe I'll do a follow-up video in a few weeks or something. I don't know, who gives a shit. I am a huge fan of the Resident Evil games. During the pandemic, things were feeling a little apocalyptic outside, and since that feeling has never really left, I've been using the titular zombie apocalypse game franchise as my go-to escapist fiction for years. Back then, I took the time to play all of the mainline entries in numerical order, along with their remakes, and I've been hopelessly addicted to the world of survival horror ever since. I'm generally a lover of old video games, too. That window of time between the NES and the PS2 is the sweet spot for me. You see, I'm a zillennial gamer, which means I got to experience a lot of technology that is now considered archaic back when it was considered the norm, but only for a brief period during my early childhood. Antiquated 3D graphics are the height of nostalgia for me, which naturally gives me an unusually high tolerance for clunky, outdated bullshit that the average Zoomer scoffs at. So keep this in mind when I tell you video games are not the same as they once were. We all know this, games have stubbornly gotten more streamlined and more user-friendly as the years go by. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I am a proponent of options. I heavily advocate that we all have as many options for how we want to enjoy our games as possible. Mods are the coolest shit in the world because they're always there for you to spice up your games and inject them with the right amount of personality to appeal to you in a more specialized way. But that was not always possible, of course. Games had limitations, and so devs had to pick a lane and stay in it for the most part. Whatever ideas they had for a game, they would inevitably end up leaving half of them on the cutting room floor in order to make it all fit into the limited storage they had to work with. The problems with tank controls were evident even back then, but the devs did what they had to in order to make the game work. Resident Evil is a beautiful franchise spun out of a really rough game with a lot of little irritants that hold it back from true greatness in my mind, but there was so much unique about it that it caught on like wildfire. And with all those rough edges sanded off in its immaculate sequel, the RE franchise was cemented as a tentpole video game series forever in the hearts of every man, woman, child, and ambiguously gendered geek like me. No one has ever stopped playing these games, and no one ever will. Like a rotten zombie missing half its limbs, the series continues, shambling forward, charting out remake after reboot after remake, winning all the game awards and fucking all the hottest twinks. A series like this can never end, because if it did, the revenue streams would stop. And what could stop Capcom from crap-comming their pants over the buckets of cash this cash cow keeps spewing? Look, Resident Evil has never been consistently great. Things tend to go in a pattern of good release to great release to shit garbage to poop and then back to being good again until the inevitable return of the pooping ass. Depending on who you ask, this pattern might indicate that Requiem will be the next butt chugger or the next meowsterpiece. But don't worry, I'm getting to that. Furthermore, thanks to the series being so long-lasting and full of remakes, there is an ever-growing number of petulant Zoomers who have never taken the time to go back and play the original trilogy of games. People are even starting to call RE4 an antiquated boomer game with shitty controls, and that used to be the kind of opinion that would get you tarred, feathered, and laughed at in the streets of Raccoon City. Oh, how soon we forget that Capcom tried to reiterate and improve on that formula, only for the franchise to suffer a near-death experience in the form of Resident Evil Giraffe Job. But we had Resident Evil 7, the return of survival horror, so now survival horror is good again. Hooray! Too bad the survival horror only lasts for half the game, and the rest of it sucks. But then they did the Resident Evil 2 remake, and it was even better survival horror. Oh yeah, survival horror is back, baby.
Groovy.
And this time, the second half of the game isn't terrible. It's just kind of mid. And the A-B scenario mechanic was completely rushed and ruined, so half of the story content that made the original so compelling is now missing, and the stuff that is there makes zero sense. Look, I love these new games. I've played them just as much as I played the shit out of the PS1 titles, but I don't think any of us are sitting around pretending they were ever perfect. Yes, they had just as much tension and overcomplicated decision-making as the original games, but the infamous boat ride at the end of 7 makes me sleepy, and the sewer at the end of 2 inspires a sense of repetitiveness I've not felt since... Suffice to say, most gamers nowadays have no idea why the classic games were cool or what it felt like to seriously play them. I say seriously because most young people's experience with the old games is that they start with the remake of the first one, a bad idea since it's meant to be a bigger, harder version of the original, and they run around getting lost for about half an hour until their heads start to hurt or they die hilariously trying to shoot an enemy they could have just ran past. Frustrated and tired from a long day's work, they set the controller down, declaring, "These controls are poopy," before settling down for the evening and passing out in their nice, warm, cozy pile of trash in the corner of their gamer bedroom. And I can't necessarily blame them for that, because for some godforsaken reason, Capcom hasn't released the original trilogy of games on any of the current digital gamer stores. You either need to sail the seven seas or purchase a boomer console and play them on original hardware. And Johnny Xbox isn't doing that shit. He's got bills to pay and the economy's rough right now. Thanks, Obama! The only options available to most people are the remakes, which, while fun and engaging on their own, are not suitable replacements for the original games. Each remake offers a totally unique experience that does not communicate the same emotions or information to the player. They borrow ideas and iconography from the classics and remix them into a soup of modern gaming sensibilities that a wider demographic can enjoy. I'm not going to pretend that's entirely a bad thing, but more people getting to have fun is great, but we can all be adults about this and also admit that the old games still had plenty of artistic merit, and their place in pop culture deserves to be remembered. Look, I'm just saying, why does Dino Crisis get to be on Steam, but Resident Evil 2 isn't? This is injustice, I swear. But you see, gamers have a tendency to treat games not as art, but as rote computer programs. A good program needs to be fully optimized, totally frictionless, so that even the most impatient, unskilled grandmother can easily navigate and understand it without getting lost or frustrated even for a second. We need the highest frame rate, the clearest resolution, the fastest load time, the most buttery smooth controls, the most quality of life features, the most beatable game, the most solvable puzzles, the biggest inventory, the most endless gameplay loop, the easiest bosses, the longest cutscenes, the most perfect, broadly appealing, inoffensive, easiest video game in the world. No gamer shall be left behind, my friend, for even if you are literally playing a fucking horror game, we will bow to your every whine and whim and make the horror game less fucking scary, just because enough of you weenies asked us to. No more inconveniences, no more suffering, no friction whatsoever. In this world, everyone is a winner! Yay, I'm a winner! Yay! Yay, I'm a wiener! I have no soul! I can put the square peg in the square hole too, Mommy! You know, I'm starting to wonder if I'm actually playing the game right now, or if my big brother is doing it and he just handed me an unplugged controller so I'd shut the fuck up. Alright, enough of my hulking out.
When I get really mad, I start fucking Iron Man.
The classic Resident Evil games had poopy butt tank controls, and nobody likes that. Nobody has ever liked that. But I'm the world's biggest, smartest, coolest contrarian, because I played those games and I loved them. So what the hell happened here? Why is everyone on Earth bad and dumb but me? Well, the secret is I never was very smart or good at anything. I sucked shit at these games just as much as anyone else on their first try. But I happened to love the atmosphere and off-kilter aesthetics of the game so much that I felt compelled to press on. I had heard so many wonderful things about this series, I knew I could find a way to enjoy it if I just took my time and engaged with the game on its own terms. Not enough people are willing to meet their entertainment halfway these days. A lot of people want it to hook them right away because they simply don't have a lot of time to play. We all get old and we have responsibilities, but luckily I'm a hikikomori and I have all the time in the world to sit on my fat butt eating Mountain Dew flavored Cheetos dipped in ranch dressing. As my mentor once said,
Do or do not. There is no try.
So I adapted to the tank controls and came to realize the game was entirely built around them in a way that made sense and wasn't difficult or unfair at all. It just takes a little getting used to, like learning to ride a bike, or learning to play literally any video game that came out before 2006, because back then video games didn't have a standardized control scheme. Every company was experimenting with stupid shit and their controllers were all a different shape. No two games had the exact same layout. You didn't hold left trigger to aim and right trigger to shoot. That shit wasn't invented yet. So engaging with anything pre-Wii takes a little bit of patience and finesse, especially with how slow they are. This is extra true for every game on the original PlayStation. It's a sluggish console with load times long enough to kill half your family. The original Resident Evil could be cut down from a 4-hour game to a 2-hour game if the load screens were removed entirely. But that's the beautiful part. They use the load screens to their advantage. The door animations are the most iconic lost artifact of classic RE. For those who have never played one of these games, it's impossible to make you understand how it feels to open one of these doors in every emotional state the game puts you through. Sometimes you're calm and collected and you walk through one of these doors to find something terrible waiting for you on the other side. Other times, you might be frantically trying to run away from an imminent threat, and the few seconds of watching the door open is a small relief you get from being pursued. But the best feeling is that wash of security that befalls you upon reaching a room with a typewriter, just seconds before a monster could slice your head off. Some of the modern games have tried to recreate that feeling of the safe room, but they tend to feel goofy more often than not because you can just open the door and see them standing there on the other side. No, you see, it's because she's a vampire. It's just like sinners, she's begging to be let inside. I'm not gonna invite you in, bitch. I'm sorry! Who gives a fuck about a door, though? Why am I telling you all this? Well, because this is just one of a million little details that pile up to creating a world of difference between the experience of the old games and the new ones. It's an example of a game not being fully optimized to the furthest possible extent and getting something meaningful out of it. It's so that you can download this opinion into your own brains and pretentiously repeat it to your idiot friends and assert dominance over them in a war of intellectual— wait, no, don't do that. That's fucking cringe. No, I want you to understand that the things that made Resident Evil good back then are different from what makes the games good today. We had a system. You would explore a big labyrinth of interconnected rooms and hallways, collecting various weapons, keys, and healing items. You had to think carefully about your decision making. You couldn't just think about how much ammo you need right now. You need to anticipate how much ammo you're going to find. You need to be unlocking every door as soon as possible so you can throw away all your keys and free up more room for healing items to fix those cuts and bite marks you collected along the way. And you certainly need to pay attention to the way enemies move, because the only thing better than killing them all is becoming good enough at the game to run right past them completely unharmed. Eliminate the need for weapons and the need for health, and you free up a lot of room in your limited inventory space.
But how can I avoid getting grabbed by the ghoulies if the controls are so tanky and awkward?
Well, you see, my fellow dingus, if you pay close attention to the zombies, you may notice that they move on a swivel just like you do. Watch their animations carefully, and you'll also see that their main attack is a small lurch forward that only grabs you if you happen to be directly in front of them when they come at you. So all you have to do is either flank them or walk backwards slowly, and they can't touch you. It also takes them a second to recover after they miss their attack, creating the perfect opportunity to run past feeling like a marathon runner, breaking the red tape at the finish line. The map layouts were often structured similarly to a Metroid game. You were free to explore certain parts of the map right away, but many paths are locked until you either find the right key or puzzle piece needed to unlock them. Sometimes keys are found by solving puzzles, avoiding booby traps, or killing deadly monsters, meaning that sooner or later, you're gonna have to face some amount of danger and overcome your fear to progress. And that is what makes horror games horror, isn't it? The need to press forward in the face of overwhelming terror? Not being led by the hand through Disney World? All of this is granted an extra layer of psychological horror by the simple fact that your ability to save progress is limited. Depending on the difficulty setting you choose, the amount of ink ribbons you find littered throughout the games may vary, but you'll always feel inclined to save progress less frequently than you would in a normal video game because you worry that you won't have enough. Now, I've played these games enough to know they're short as heck, and the devs were very generously peppering these things throughout the game, so you couldn't run out unless you were unreasonably anxious to the point of wasting them all in the first 30 minutes like a buffoon. It's a classic example of the sort of inconvenience that's been ironed out of modern games because of the TikTok-brained youth and endlessly tired gamer dads who are too fickle to put up with anything that threatens to waste their precious time for more than 3 seconds. You fucking ingrates. See, when people say that if gamers are left to their own devices, they'll optimize the fun out of a game, I'm telling you, this is the fun that has been optimized out of the game. The ink ribbons are genius because they accomplish a few things. For one, they raise the stakes considerably, meaning there are actual consequences to dying, ergo, getting chased by spooky zombies has an added layer of genuine terror. You're not just afraid of a clump of pixels, you pussy, you're afraid of material consequences, and this has material effect on the way you play. It's very different from the feeling I got playing Outlast, a game that auto-saves constantly, so the only consequence for dying is having to redo the last 5 seconds of things you just did. But Outlast isn't scary to begin with, so whatever, that's my hot take for you. For 2, ink ribbons add an additional layer to the strategy of inventory management. If you know how to play the games well, you know that you won't die frequently, so you feel more comfortable ignoring half the ink ribbons in favor of picking up more important things. A greater sense of risk creates a greater sense of reward. Adding some amount of friction to a game is necessary to making the player feel rewarded by the end of the experience. Different players have different tolerance levels, of course, but the RE series has never quite returned to the levels of anxiety instilled by the classics. The closest they've come is in Resident Evil 7, a game that had the option to play with ink ribbons, and some of the most pants-shittingly terrifying jump scares in gamer history. I love that game as much as I hate it. Kiss me, Jack Baker. I know I sound like I'm contradicting myself by yearning for the games of old while pretentiously preaching about accessibility options, but believe me, I'm even more difficult to understand when I'm not dumping hours of gamer psychosis on the internet. Just take it from me when I say that none of these games are perfect, and every bit of quality of life added to a game is a trade-off. You'll always lose some and win some. Nothing is a dichotomy here in Gigaland. Also, the parts of this video where I bully you are obviously a joke. Grow the fuck up. Attempts to streamline the experience and broaden it for a new audience remain spotty and imperfect, and nowhere is this more present than in 2 of the most recent entries, Resident Evil 3 Remake and Resident Evil Village. And we all know why Resident Evil 3 is pooped from a butt. It's not as pretty as RE2, it's missing half of the content from classic RE3, it's a hodgepodge of poorly reused assets from previous games, it has no cool factor or identity of its own, and it feels like a rush job through and through. No one was happy that it released as a $60 game when the reality is that it was an expansion on RE2 with a 3-hour campaign that still has no replay value and next to nothing in extra content. What we haven't discussed enough, however, is Resident Evil Village and the many ways that game was a failure.
Ugh, it stinks.
Now, I'm not going to say it's a bad game, because obviously everyone loves the shit out of it. It's got a lot more going for it than 3-make, but I personally find Village to be a bit of a slog on replays, and I want to explain why I think it kinda sucks in a lot of ways I don't hear talked about enough, even if it is pretty fun for the most part. Comparison is the thief of joy, after all, and Village does something very foolish by constantly reminding its players of older, better games that it could never hope to compare to. For this reason, it comes off feeling a bit sloppy. RE3's excuse is that it was developed by the secondary dev team on a tight schedule, but Village had a lot of the same folks who worked on 2 and 7 at the helm, so what gives? I think some amount of grace should be afforded with this being the COVID game of the series. It's clear from the trailers that there were meant to be a lot more content here. Some things we see in trailer footage are nowhere to be found in the final product. Remember that part where you come upon a crossroads and the game makes it seem like you can choose to tackle the next 3 areas in any order you want, and then you try to unlock each gate and realize that, no, there is a set order and you have no say in the matter. Remember some of the bizarre interactions, like this one where a woman begs you to get her and her dad safely into Louisa's house, only for you to take 2 steps into her backyard, climb a chest-high wall, and unlock the gate for her?
Took your damn time.
Remember how that NPC seemed like she was going to become an important character, only for her and all of the villagers in the game called Village to die tragically in a fire 5 seconds after being introduced? It really seems like those characters had been written with a purpose. Each of them were presented in a way that implied something about their character, setting them up to each have their own quest line that could have been a recurring part of the game's story, and given that the player regularly comes back to the village to find it in varying states of disrepair with new treasures and enemies to find, I think it's safe to assume that there were much bigger plans for these assets. I have to assume that the devs simply found a use for the actors' performances they had already gone through the process of mocapping and trimmed the game's length down to size in order to meet their release window on time. This would explain a lot of oddities, such as Ethan slamming his mangled hand on a windowsill minutes after having his fingers bitten off, or using his remaining 3 digits to slide down a zipline one-handed. I have tried doing this exact thing on a playground, by the way. It's not possible. My thumb, index, and middle fingers are not strong enough to support my entire body. Given that the demo had Ethan's hands completely intact, I have to believe the wolf biting his fingies off was part of the last-minute changes. And you know, I could forgive all of this if not for a piece of information I discovered during my research. It's known that development of this game was troubled, but unfortunately its fault cannot entirely be attributed to COVID delays. The sloppiness of its design doesn't just amount to some awkward pacing and cut content. The parts of the game that did get finished are designed so poorly I have to talk about them. That's the real reason for this video. This is why I started writing this in the first place. I saw some trailers for Requiem and they reminded me of things I hated about Village, and now I have to talk about them and you have to hear it. You are my students, and I am the wise elder gazing blissfully into my crystal ball. I achieved enlightenment at the roots of Yggdrasil, while you are all shitting in pants instead of toilets. I have pondered the scrolls of ancient instruction manuals and scaled mountains of video games other people haven't, because while they were busy working their jobs and raising families, I was doing God's work by playing every video game known to humankind. There will always be a layer of depth to gaming you cannot comprehend by simply watching someone else play or emulating it and using save states and fast forwards to make sure you're never challenged or inconvenienced too much. It's great that you can experience a game without really playing it, but don't act like you did play it if you didn't. That's right, I'm gatekeeping now. I'm the gatekeeper. Get out of my dungeon with your smelly butt cheeks before I disintegrate you. And where the fuck am I? Am I in a field? What is this? What is that? Is that God? Sorry, I think I had a little too much to drink tonight. I lost track of what the fuck I was talking about. Oh yeah, Resident Evil Village fucking sucks. It's a piece of shit game, and not because of COVID, but because it was designed by some harebrained monkeys in a zoo. I am still shocked to this day the same people who worked on RE7 and 2 also made this game. It was clear from the get-go that their games needed a little more time in the oven to reach true perfection, but Village takes the shit cake for sure. And you know what's really fucked up? On my first playthrough, I was absolutely loving it. Thought it was the bee's knees. Finally, they found a way to create the perfect blend of explorative survival horror with the more action-focused perspective of RE4. The enemies are back to wobbling around erratically, dodging bullets and dancing around you to heighten the tension. We're back to exploring fancy castles full of locked doors and wacky puzzles, too. There's lots of boss fights against ugly people who transform into disgusting fleshy masses of unhinged mutant debauchery. And the gunplay is exactly the same as it was in 7, except now you can also gently shove enemies off it. Wait, I thought the gunplay in 7 was deliberately made clumsy and limited to raise tension. Are we really back to that? In an action game? Oh, but Ethan has had some off-screen training. Okay, sure. He's not exactly Leon Kennedy, but at least he learned how to shove, I guess? Embarrassingly, Village was meant to be an action-packed callback to RE4 from the start. They had originally filled the game with tons of bullet sponge enemies to the point that playtesters hated it. They called it boring, and this was really late into development too. The devs were completely shocked that no one was enjoying a game built for Leon Kennedy that forces you to play as a slow, dumb guy with no peripheral vision. To borrow a quote from Quality Assurance Manager himself, the game's content was completely divorced from what the team thought they had made. Naturally, they were panicked, but they came to the conclusion that the game could be fixed by simply lowering the amount of enemy encounters and finding other ways to convince the player that enemies might pop out at any moment. This way, the game still feels scary without overloading the player with tedious combat, and the enemy encounters have more impact due to being more rare. For many people, this fix was enough to make the game a masterpiece in their minds. But I am not convinced it was enough. I am convinced that the team still has no idea what they made, because what I see is a thinly veiled attempt to take a crappy linear action game and fill it with the aesthetics of survival horror to trick us all into believing it really was that. Walk into Dimitrescu's castle. Finally, we are in the survival horror. Now we're free to explore. And look, they even brought back the thing from the first game's remake where you have to find 4 masks. Isn't that a fun callback? Alright, let's see which door we can go through. Oh, look, a cutscene that interrupts you and drags you into a totally different room. Well, that was a funny way to introduce the creepy vampire ladies. Kind of weird how the chains just clip through the ceiling, but whatever. How many players actually looked up there? Alright, let's try every door and see where they lead. Nope. Nope. Oh god, I hope this castle is as big and maze-like as the Spencer Mansion. This doesn't seem right. Well, I checked every door, and this is the only one I can open. Let's open it up with this little eyeball here, and oh look, another cutscene. Now, I mentioned earlier that I really liked this game the first time around. Well, as I quickly discovered during my second playthrough, Resident Evil Village is about as wide as an ocean, but deep as a puddle. I thought the opening was bad enough for forcing players to walk slowly through a forest scene full of spooky noises where nothing actually happens, but what was worse is the entire game is on rails. Every single moment is heavily scripted, and the game never even attempts the kind of labyrinthian Metroid level design of the classics until you reach the factory near the very end. And guess what? People call the factory the worst part. Huh? Did we play the same game here? You're telling me the only part of the entire game that gives you player agency, the only part that asks if you want to go right or left, is the bad part? The part where you have to think? Has everyone here been gaslit? When the reviews first rolled out, everyone compared Village to a theme park ride as if it was a good thing. This was bewildering to me, as I'd been making the same comparison while talking shit about it. Is it really that cool to have a game that pretends to put your character in danger without actually doing so? Is it totally awesome for a game to present you with a puzzle that has no fail state that even a baby could solve? Why the fuck do all these Europeans have American accents? What fucking part of Europe is this? South Dakota? To get to the last of my many whiny gamer nitpicks, it's time I begin pouring my brain out over the way these games present their narratives. I don't think Resident Evil has ever been particularly good at telling their stories through dialogue. The series is notorious for having really bad voice acting in its early years, but the actors we have now do a pretty good job. I would argue, however, that the quality of writing has never fully recovered. The early games are super cheesy, but that's become part of the charm for a lot of people. RE4 may have a thin plot, but Leon is so effortlessly cool and funny that it hits that sweet spot, nailing the tone of a so bad it's good action movie. I would attribute most of that game's cool factor to director Shinji Mikami. He's just a talented guy. Have y'all played God Hand? Holy fuck. Unfortunately, modern Resident Evil has found itself falling further and further away from the so bad it's good territory, and more into the taking itself dead seriously while being egregiously unrealistic and cringe camp. The only modern RE game that told a good story with a serious tone is the remake of RE2. Leon's confrontation with Ada is my favorite cutscene in the entire series. There's cinematic flair, the obvious symbolism with the two of them talking on opposite ends of a collapsing bridge. The dialogue is written well, and the actors absolutely killed it with their performances. And that extends to most cutscenes in that game. Aside from a few awkward line deliveries, I really think it's an exceptional example of gamerific narrativity.
Take care of yourself, Leon.
No!
The remake of RE4 was a little bit lacking by comparison, but that has more to do with RE4 having a really dumbass, boring story to begin with. RE2 built on an already great foundation, while RE4 was working overtime to twist a deeply unserious story into something that can be taken semi-seriously until it devolves into total schlock at the very end. The attempt to remove as much of the comedy as possible without pissing off the internet felt misguided here, but at least when Leon does take the time to crack wise, he manages to get a chuckle out of me. This remake's existence makes it even more perplexing to me that they tried to turn Ethan Winters into more of a character in Village, giving him a lot of importance in the narrative and way too many dad jokes. I thought the intent with RE7 was to give us a faceless, blank slate normal guy we could project ourselves onto, but now that he's been rekajiggered into a full-on action hero, I'm a little annoyed. He has the personality of wet bread, and he has all the charisma of John Arbuckle on ice skates. He's so stupid, the villains have to unnaturally act even dumber than him to give him a chance at survival. Lady Dimitrescu has this pointless conversation on the phone to show you that she's like super jealous of her siblings and really wants to kill you. Seconds later, she grabs Ethan and instead of killing him, she shoves him through the floor, shouting, "I will hunt you down." Bitch, what? Hunt me? You just caught me and you threw me away, you giant pillowy mommy-dommy dingus. Oh, and that's another thing. This game is fucking incapable of letting me play for more than 5 minutes without being interrupted by a cutscene. They're not even important cutscenes. They don't further the narrative like the ones in RE2 do. Most of them serve as an excuse to drag the player out of one hallway and into another, completely disconnected hallway. It's as if they realized the levels they designed weren't that fun to explore, so they ditched the idea of an interconnected Spencer Mansion halfway through and connected the parts they'd already modeled with some random events and chase sequences. Seriously. I dare you to play the game in third-person mode and have a stopwatch timing how long you can play before it switches back to first-person for a cutscene. I swear it happens 100 times in the span of one 6-hour playthrough. I could get behind the idea of a more narrative-driven RE game if this was really the direction they wanted to take, but they sincerely believed they were making a spiritual sequel to RE4, and the cutscenes are just stupid. Every single one has the characters behaving like deranged butt-headed nincompoops. None of the dialogue sounds like something a human being would ever say, and when Elena falls into the fire, she disappears completely, phasing through the truck. She only fell like 5 feet, she wouldn't die instantly from that, but in this game, fire works like a black hole, apparently. Ethan tries to get out of the burning building by ramming a truck into a wall, which is already pretty stupid, but why does the truck randomly tip itself over like he's in GTA 5? I found a video that shows the cutscene from outside the truck and it looks even dumber. When Ethan gets his hand sliced off, he uses magic chemicals to graft his hand back on, which is fine. He already did this with his foot in the 7th game. It's weird, but it's been established, whatever. What doesn't make sense to me is that his shirt and jacket sleeve also stay perfectly attached. Why didn't those fall off the second his hand got sliced? And don't get me started on Chris. Chris has always been my least favorite recurring character in Resident Evil, and it's not because I dislike any particular trait about him, it's because he has no traits. He's always been the boring straight man, and here they give him a dark coat and tried to make him look like the bad guy. Why does he act this way? Why does he refuse to explain anything to Ethan, have his men beat him up, kill his wife, and steal his baby without explaining anything? We're never given any justification for this. He just does it, and then the plot twist at the end, he's not a bad guy at all. Ethan's wife was just a fake wife, and that makes it okay to smack Ethan in the head with the butt of a rifle and steal his baby. See, this was just Mother Miranda shapeshifted to look like Mia, which ironically means all of Mia's characterization at the start is flushed down the toilet. Every detail in that intro that signaled she was deeply traumatized and fucked up from Louisiana, and that she knew about Ethan's mold infection, all of that was just Mother Miranda pretending to be Mia so she could steal the baby. Yeah, I call bullshit. This has last-minute rewrite all over it. I know Chris's only character trait is that he's sad and his comrades die all the time, and that would motivate him to stop Ethan getting involved, but can we drop that terrible plot thread already? It started and ended in RE6, yet they keep making that Chris's entire personality. We get it. He's sad. Get a better character next time. Hey, that's more like it. When Ethan sneaks up behind Moreau and steals his flask, he stands there and waits to be noticed so he can go, "Ha ha, I stole your thing," instead of getting away clean. Heisenberg is a man who has the power to control metal, and you beat him using a tank that shoots bullets at him. Apparently, it's some kind of metal polymer that he can't control, but also he built it himself, and he uses his powers to lift it up halfway through the boss fight and destroy it anyway. But that's okay, because Ethan pulls out his 1911 and shoots Heisenberg with it a couple times, causing him to explode, thus proving the 1911 is the coolest handgun ever invented.
Impressed?
The main villain of this game is Mother Miranda, and her motivation feels totally boring and lame, but don't worry, it's also a little misogynistic. See, she had a baby a long time ago and it died, so naturally, she lost her mind completely and has been obsessed with babies ever since, to the point of calling all of these century-old freaks her children. She steals Ethan's super baby and tries to use the secret of the baby ooze to resurrect her dead baby, but it doesn't work and the super baby reforms as herself. Womp womp. Okay, this video is getting way too long. For fuck's sake, what is wrong with me? I don't care that much. Talk about Resident Evil Requiem and get this shit over with. Far and away, my biggest fear for Requiem is the attempt at pleasing everyone. I know this isn't the first time we've had an RE game where you can play as more than one character, but the way the game seems to be evenly split between two totally different genres is a trick I haven't seen since the Revelations game, and that one didn't do it so well. As iconic and cool and wacky as Village was, it was also a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. It tried to be too many things and ultimately came up short in every category. Every single thing that Village does has been done better in past games. I don't want to see them make the same mistake again. God, have I rambled enough yet? I took half an hour just to say that.
But wait, there's more.
Here's why I'm confident that Requiem won't be the second verse same as the first. For you see, all of my disappointment in Village being a discount RE4 has been washed away by the existence of this remake of RE4. From an artist standpoint, I'm a bit disgusted at how they drained all the original game's B-movie charm out and injected it with the ooze of gritty realism, but I can't deny that I poured a couple hundred hours into it in the year of its release. They leaned all the way in on making an action game this time, and it's fucking awesome. Instead of Ethan's bumble fucking around, Leon has various ways to deal with incoming enemies. You can duck under projectiles, you can roundhouse kick stunned baddies, you can parry all attacks with your knife blade, and shooting at enemies' body parts can injure them instead of them acting like sponges and thoughtlessly absorbing every hit below the neck. And because the player is capable of doing so much stuff, the enemies are allowed to attack you in hordes without the game feeling cheap or unfair. Village didn't give you all these wacky abilities. There wasn't much to it other than block when the enemies get close, then point and shoot. You may have noticed that every enemy in Village spends more time zigzagging around you than they do attacking. Even the bosses will wobble around like a lubricated turtle T-posing for an hour between every attack. That's because if they were actually trying to kill you, it'd be effortless. Ethan's controls are too slow and clumsy for it to be a fair fight. Leon's are, conversely, so overpowered they decided not to give the player any relief whatsoever. You're not invincible during any of your animations, aside from kicking. You can be interrupted during almost any action you take. Enemies do a lot more than wobble left and right. Now they can grab you, throw shit at you, punch you, spin attack from Legend of Zelda at you. You're a one-man army against a zombie hive mind as opposed to a cringy gamer dad pointing and clicking wildly like he's trying to do his taxes on the internet for the first time. Requiem is clearly taking influence from that game, as well as the brief section where you play as Ashley. Ashley is totally defenseless, all she can do is run and hide. The puzzles in this section are nothing too complicated, but they're engaging enough, and the tension of being stalked by some sentient suits of armor keeps this part from getting boring even on repeat playthroughs. This section is helped further by the fact that it doesn't randomize the answer to its clock puzzle, so you can skip half of the library if you remember the solution. However, skipping certain parts of the library may cause a few treasures to become inaccessible forever, whereas going out of your way to unlock everything as Ashley opens up some paths that Leon can later follow. I'm guessing this was the inspiration behind Requiem, as it will allegedly be using this form of level design throughout. If the player decides not to collect certain items while playing as Grace, Leon can find them later as he follows behind her. This is a clever way to use every location in the game twice. To the player, it might feel as though we're experiencing two totally different games due to the drastic shift in tone and gameplay loop, and the devs don't have to spend as much time building all of it. This will also kill two birds with one stone, preventing nerds on the internet from complaining that the series has abandoned survival horror, or that they've watered down the series' identity to the point that it's lost its core appeal. You're getting the best of both worlds approach this time, for better or worse. My only wish is that they'd give us the option to choose a character at the game's start and then play the whole campaign from there. You know, like all the old games did. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried that during development and decided the constant switching was better, but like I said, I'm all about having more options in my games. What if it turns out I like the action segments a lot, but the horror segments turn out to be boring on a second run? Regardless, I'm sure someone will mod the option to skip certain parts in eventually. Just gotta buy the PC version and keep an eye on them Nexus geniuses. And we don't have a ton of info on the game's story, but I've seen a few people mad about this one clip where Leon stares at a monster dumbfounded as it carves a woman up with a chainsaw right in front of him. I guess he's got early onset dementia in his 50s, I don't know. The way they're flaunting Raccoon City in the trailers isn't doing much for me. Bringing back Sherry Birkin and the police station isn't enough to get me falling to my knees crying anymore. We live in a post-Avengers world where every nostalgic IP under the sun has been squeezed dry. There was a time when I would have gotten excited over this sort of cage angling, but I've grown tired and old, and these kinds of callbacks don't mean anything anymore. It's like I've swallowed so much pop cultural poison I've built up an immunity to it. Evidently, they're bringing back Crimson Heads with a new twist. I really like that, not just because it's a callback to one of my favorite games ever, but because this is exactly the kind of decision-making process I was desperately missing in Village. Any zombie you fail to decapitate can come back as a blister head, and on top of that, the game allegedly has some civilian NPCs who will become zombies later if you don't save them from getting chomped. That's an extra layer of stress and forward thinking I like to see. The return of traditional zombies is pretty exciting on its own, but now each one seems to have their own sets of behaviors based on their occupation from when they walked amongst the living. I'm glad to see more of that George Romero influence. Dawn of the Dead is back, babies. In the course of making this video, I've had to replay several of the games, and I've come to realize that this series has always been capitulating towards whatever Capcom thinks will be appealing to the broadest demographic. The new game offers the option to switch between first and third person perspectives. But where's the fixed camera angle option? The nerds cry in terror. Let's be real here. The general public doesn't care enough for that option to be worth the effort. These games will never return to the way they used to be, because the way they used to be was exactly how everything else was in the 90s. And the way those games from the 2000s felt epitomizes every game from the 2000s. Have you ever gone back to try Resident Evil 5? Of all the brown and gray action shooters that ever existed, that is the most aggressively brown and gray dumb action shooter of them all. It's like Gears of War and Max Payne having gay sex on GTA 4's bed. Never mind the callousness of its inaccurate portrayal of African culture. Gamers of the internet already decided a long time ago that this game is certifiably not racist, because IGN said it was. Just ignore the fact that Japan is constantly doing this shit across all their media and uncritically accept the idea that this is no different from shooting white zombies in Midwest America. Nope, nothing racially charged about this. No nuance here whatsoever. Look, most of my audience is smart enough to know that they don't need this explained to them, but for the new kids there in the back, the controversy was never about the fact that you shoot African zombies in Africa. The problem is the savage grass-skirted natives wearing ceremonial masks chucking spears at you. The Spanish people in RE4 aren't controversial because historically their culture hasn't been colonized and perverted by outside entities, so there simply aren't as harsh of stereotypes for them in existence. Just because all people are created equal doesn't mean they have been treated equally over the years. Much of the world irrationally hates people with dark skin, and that context matters. It's okay to have these conversations without acting like a baby and shutting your eyes and ears every time politics threaten to remind you that the real world exists outside of your video games. Being an outsider or a nerd does not remove you from the rest of humanity. You have a place in this world too. That was a whole tangent I didn't need to get into, but Christ, I hate gamers. Capital G, gamers. If you feel the urge to post some dissenting comments because I dared to talk about racial inequality for 10 seconds, please delete your account and never watch my videos again. You fucking pussy. Anyway, the series started out as a scrappy horror game and immediately veered into action movie tropes before the GameCube even rolled around. The cataclysmic success of the second and fourth games are just too powerful. Money talks, and it's for this reason that I can only hold on to so much anger for recent entries like Village. Even that game has so much hard work poured into it, I can appreciate the intense level of detail in every corner. Sure, some of it's a little rough, but I can't deny the fun I had playing it. Shooting monsters and putting keys in keyholes comes with a raw satisfaction, and that dopamine center in my brain just can't ignore. Maybe Village isn't as replayable as some of the better games, but as an occasional haunted house experience, it's nice to plow through it once in a while, and in the meantime I have found a wealth of new fun to be had with Code Veronica. I got a Sega Dreamcast last year and bought this game to go with it. I was shocked at how fun it is. It's just like the first 3 games, but longer and way more difficult. I'd written it off for years because it looked like a lame spin-off, but it's like the old school survival horror I always wanted more of, and it was hiding under my nose this whole time. Let's see them try to remake this game in RE5 without pissing people off. All in all, there are 2 big factors motivating my optimism for this game right now. There's the fact that the RE4 remake was super fun, they got Resident Evil action down to an exact science, and then there's the fact that this game has been in development for a long time, so unlike Village, it's had plenty of time in the oven with no interruptions, delays, or real-world ending pandemics to freak everyone out. I'll give my thoughts on the game in a later video once I've had time to sit with it and ponder my crystal ball some more, and I'll sure as shit be watching that new Resident Evil movie. They got one of the whitest kids you know to direct it, which means this runs the risk of being the world's first good RE movie. Holy shit, what a year to be a fan of the corny games where you shoot zombies and use typewriters in the 21st century. Thanks for listening to my 42 minutes of gamer psychosis. If you want to see more fun videos like this one, feel free to throw money at me so I can keep the pantry stocked. I hate corporate ads and sponsorships with a fiery passion, even though that's where the real money is on YouTube. I'd love to gain support through crowdfunding so I don't have to resort to that. On my channel and my Patreon, I like to do art vlogs, anime and movie discussions, short films, and I even stream video games with my friend Trixie the Golden Witch on our collaborative YouTube channel, Slime Dolls. My friends and I have a lot of projects in the pipeline, so I hope to see you soon.